The crowd burst into laughter just as the man dropped to his knees in the middle of the dusty market. His clothes were worn, his shoes cracked, and his hands trembled as he held out a simple ring toward Kadija. Vendors paused mid-sale. Children pointed. Someone muttered, "He can't even feed himself, and he wants a wife." But Kadija didn't laugh. She stood frozen behind her fruit stall. Eyes locked on his face, not his clothes, not the ring, but something deeper, something no one else seemed to notice. And for one long, breathless moment, the entire market waited for her answer. "Before we go on, tell me honestly, if a man with nothing asked for your hand, would you trust his heart or walk away? And where are you watching from right now? Drop your country and local time in the comments. If you love powerful emotional stories filled with shocking twists and deep meaning, make sure to subscribe and stay with me." No one in the market knew that the man kneeling in the dust had been called many things in the last 3 years. Visionary, ruthless, untouchable. In the glass towers of central Accra, Tendai Adebayo was the kind of CEO whose name made investors lean forward and competitors whisper. He owned logistics firms, construction companies, and one rapidly growing chain of private hospitals that had made him richer than most men twice his age. His face had appeared in magazines. His speeches had been quoted online. Ministers shook his hand. Young men tried to copy the way he walked into a room, but none of that was real to him anymore. Not when it came to women. Not after Evelyn. The market crowd laughed harder as he held the ring toward Kadija, but Tendai barely heard them. His mind, sharpened by habit, was already split in two, the man kneeling in rags and the man beneath the disguise, watching everything with cold precision. He had trained himself to do that, to study faces, to notice the flicker in people's eyes when they saw his worn shirt, his tired sandals, the cheapness of what he seemed to be. Shock, disgust, pity, sometimes greed if they thought he could still be useful. He had seen every version of it, long before he came to this dusty market, before he let red dirt stain his trousers and rubbed charcoal on the cuff of his shirt to make it look older. He had stood in a penthouse apartment and watched a woman he once planned to marry pack diamonds into a velvet case with steady hands. Evelyn had not cried when he confronted her. That was what he remembered most, not the betrayal itself. Not even the way he found out she had been seeing a married politician on the side while promising Tendai forever. It was the calmness. The insultingly calm way she zipped her designer bag and turned to him as if he were the one making the moment ugly. "Don't look at me like that," she had said. "You know how the world works." The city lights had reflected in the massive window behind her, turning the room into a mirror. Tendai had seen both of them at once himself, still clutching the engagement papers he had meant to sign that night. And Evelyn, beautiful and composed, wearing the watch he had bought her after she told him she wanted a man she could trust. "I trusted you," he said. She laughed once softly. "No, you trusted what money let you imagine." He still remembered the way the sentence landed, not like a stab, like acid, because part of him feared she was right. After Evelyn came Adaora, a charity founder with a gentle voice and perfectly chosen words. She told him she admired humility, that wealth meant nothing to her, that character was everything. 2 weeks later, he overheard her on the phone in his guest house asking a friend whether his equity holdings could be placed in her name after marriage. She spoke in percentages, in backup plans, in exit routes. Then came Zinle, who cried when he told her his father had once worked as a mechanic and called his story inspiring. When he later approached her in plain clothes through a mutual contact and pretended to be a struggling entrepreneur with debt, her face hardened so quickly it almost impressed him. "You should focus on your life before chasing women like me," she said, handing his number back as if it had dirtied her fingers. One after another, the women blurred together. Some rejected him immediately. Some toyed with him. Some performed kindness for just long enough to measure what they might gain. and once in a while one would surprise him only for the surprise to rot upon closer inspection. That was how the test began. At first it was a wounded impulse, ugly and private. He told himself he simply wanted to understand. If he approached a woman as an ordinary man, a poor man, a man with no visible power, would anyone still choose him? Or had his life become a marketplace where affection, softness, admiration, even desire all carried hidden price tags? He hired a discreet private investigator named Sefu. A quiet man with unreadable eyes and a loyalty money could not bend, because Tendai had once paid for his daughter's surgery. Sefu assembled false backgrounds, rented modest rooms in rough neighborhoods, created believable identities, and coached Tendai on details no billionaire would naturally know: how much cheap bread cost in specific districts, which trotro routes took the longest, what brand of soap laborers bought when cash was tight. "You're turning heartbreak into research," Sefu told him once. Tendai answered without humor. Research gets results. But results did not heal anything. Each failed test made him harder. Each lie told in the name of truth stripped something from him. Soon it was not enough to ask whether a woman would date a poor man. He began building layered scenarios. He would present weakness, then opportunity, scarcity, then temptation. He would arrive as a man who owned almost nothing and watch what people did when they believed there was nothing to gain from kindness. Sometimes the cruelty shocked even him. A woman named Lin Daiwei invited him to dinner after meeting him at a roadside cafe. She smiled at his stories, asked thoughtful questions, and touched his hand when he spoke of losing his mother. For 3 days he almost believed she might be different. On the 4th, she introduced him to her cousin, who happened to run a small transport business. Tendai was hopeful until he heard them whispering in the kitchen. "He's desperate," Lindiwe said. "Men like that work hardest when they think you saved them." Another time, a schoolteacher named Amara told him dignity mattered more than wealth. She even agreed to walk with him through a crowded evening market while rainwater gathered along the gutters. Then she saw his rented room. The silence that followed was brutal. Not because the room was dirty. It was clean, modest, honest. But her eyes moved across the peeling paint, the thin mattress, the aluminum cooking pot on the floor, and whatever fantasy she had allowed herself died in seconds. When she turned back to him, the warmth was gone. "I'm sorry," she said, though she did not sound sorry at all. "I want stability." He nodded as if he understood. He always nodded. But later that night, back in the silent luxury of his real home, he stood in his marble kitchen and smashed a crystal glass so hard that blood ran into his palm. Stability. That word stayed with him. As if poor men did not deserve love until they had earned enough to make a woman feel safe. As if honesty without money was childish. As if tenderness only counted after success certified it. So Tendai stopped looking for love. He began looking for proof. That was what brought him to the outer districts, far from the circles where his face was known. It was why he moved through markets in faded shirts, why he lowered his voice, why he kept his shoulders slightly bent when he walked. He was not searching for romance anymore. He was hunting for the one impossible thing he was no longer sure existed. A woman who would not measure a man by what could be taken from him. Then he saw Kadija. Not because she was the most beautiful woman in the market, though there was a quiet grace in her that drew the eye. It was the way she handled cruelty. A customer insulted her prices, and she did not snap back. A boy tried to steal an orange, and instead of shouting, she pressed 2 bruised bananas into his hands and told him to run before the stall owner nearby saw him. When an old woman nearly slipped in the mud, Kadija abandoned a sale to steady her. There had been no audience for any of it, no performance, no angle. Tendai noticed such things because he had taught himself to. Still, he did not trust what he noticed. He returned 3 times before speaking to her. The first day he bought mangoes and said little. The second day he asked whether business was always this slow. The third, he arrived soaked from a passing rain and watched Kadija pull a sack over her fruit before covering her own shoulders. That bothered him more than it should have. It bothered him because it looked real, and real was dangerous. Now kneeling in the dust before her stall with laughter swelling around him, Tendai felt something he had not expected. Fear. Not fear that she would reject him. He was used to rejection. He had prepared for it. Rejection had become almost comforting in its familiarity. No, this was worse. No, this. He feared that if Kadija looked at him with kindness, true kindness, something inside him that had gone hard and cold, might begin to crack. And he no longer knew whether that would save him or destroy him. Her fingers tightened around the edge of the wooden stall. The laughter around them started to thin curiosity, overtaking mockery. Tendai kept his head slightly bowed, playing the poor man to the end. But beneath the lowered gaze, every instinct in him sharpened. This was no longer just another test. And somewhere deep inside, against all his rules, against all his anger, against the evidence of every woman who had come before, he wanted Kadija to say yes. Kadija Musa had learned very early that hunger changed the sound of a person's breathing. A well-fed person breathed carelessly. Deep, loose, unafraid. A hungry person breathed like someone making a promise to survive one more hour. That was how she knew, even before she looked up fully, that the man kneeling in front of her in the market was not performing for the crowd the way people thought he was. Yes, his proposal was strange. Yes, the timing was humiliating. Yes, the entire scene looked absurd. But beneath the laughter, beneath the dust, beneath the shock of a man in worn clothes holding out a ring too small and too plain for spectacle, Kadija heard something else in him. Tension. Not the tension of a trickster enjoying attention. The tension of someone risking something. Around her, the market kept reacting. A fish seller slapped her thigh and barked out a laugh so loud that 3 nearby women joined in. 2 teenage boys stopped pushing a cart of cassava and stood grinning openly. An older man selling phone chargers shook his head and muttered that poverty had finally driven men mad. Someone in the back whistled. Someone else shouted that Kadija should say yes if she wanted free suffering for life. Kadija stood very still behind her fruit stall, one hand resting on a crate of oranges, the other hanging by her side. Her face gave nothing away. Years of necessity had taught her that much. Poor women did not always get the luxury of public emotion. If she showed softness too early, people pushed. If she showed anger too openly, people punished. So she learned to keep her feelings tucked behind calm eyes and measured silence. Only Jabari could still read her quickly. Her younger brother sat on an overturned bucket under the patched shade cloth behind the stall, wrapped in a faded football jersey 2 sizes too big. At 12, he had the long limbs of a growing boy and the exhausted face of someone who had spent too many nights coughing instead of sleeping. He looked from the kneeling man to Kadija, confused and alert all at once. Kadija, he whispered, his voice strained. "Do you know him?" She did. And she did not. She had seen him 3 times. The first time he bought mangoes and asked no foolish questions. That alone made him unusual. Men who approached women at the market usually had one of 2 intentions: to flirt badly or to bargain cruelly. He had done neither. He had simply paid, thanked her, and left. The second time, he lingered. He asked whether business was always difficult during the dry week before payday. Kadija had glanced up, then surprised less by the question than by the way he asked it. Not with pity. Not with the greedy curiosity of someone collecting stories about hardship to feel wise, just with attention. "It is difficult for people who cannot afford to waste anything," she had replied. He had looked at the bruised bananas, the half-ripe pawpaws, the careful way she arranged the better fruit at the front to draw customers in. "Then you must be very good at not wasting." She almost smiled. "You learn or you starve." On the 3rd day, rain came hard and sideways just before noon. The market broke into chaos. Plastic sheets snapped. Women shouted. Men dragged sacks under shelter. Water rushed through the walkway in muddy streams. Kadija had moved fast, covering the fruit, with an old grain sack lifting the crate off the wet ground and pulling Jabari closer to the dry patch behind her stall. When she turned, she saw the same man standing in the rain, without moving, as if he had forgotten to protect himself. "You'll get sick," she told him. He looked at her drenched, blinking through the water. "You should cover yourself first," he said. Kadija almost laughed, then, though not from amusement, "And let my stock drown." Without answering, he stepped forward and helped her drag a wooden board across the side opening where the water was coming in strongest. He did not do it gracefully. His hands slipped. His shoulders strained. He looked like a man not used to such work, though he tried to hide it. That had stayed with her. So had the way he left after. No demand, no flirtation, no claim that because he had helped he now deserved her time or gratitude. Just a nod. That was rare enough to be suspicious. Kadija knew men in many forms. Men like her father Musa, who had once been gentle in the mornings and bitter by nightfall after the factory reduced his wages and his pride went with them. Men like the landlord, who smiled too broadly when rent was late and asked whether a pretty girl like her had considered other ways to settle debt. Men like the butcher's son, who followed girls through side streets with a swagger borrowed from stronger men. Men like Pastor Daniel, whose prayers sounded holy until the collection basket came around and his eyes sharpened. And men like Mosey. At the thought of him, something small and hard turned in her chest. Mosey had not been cruel at first. That was what made remembering him so dangerous. Cruelty that arrived wearing cruelty was easy to resist. But Mosey had come dressed as tenderness. He carried sacks for her mother when her back hurt. He bought Jabari cheap biscuits when the boy was younger and still strong enough to run errands. He spoke softly, as if the world were too wounded for harsh voices. He used to tell Kadija that one day they would leave the district together, open a small provisions shop, and live in a room where rain did not leak through the roof. She had believed him. Not because she was foolish, because she was tired, and hope sometimes enters tired people like a thief. For 11 months he courted her with patience that looked like respect. He never pushed her too far. He never demanded. He waited until trust had grown roots. Then, little by little, he began asking questions that seemed harmless. How much did she make in a good week? Did her mother still keep emergency cash hidden in the lining of the mattress? Was the landlord likely to sell the building? Did Jabari's medicine really cost that much? At the time, Kadija answered, because love often disguises surveillance as concern. Then one evening, while carrying unsold guavas home in a basin balanced against her hip, she passed the small cafe near the taxi rank and saw Mosi inside with a woman she recognized instantly. Nia Adomako, the polished daughter of a transport contractor who owned 3 minibuses and a 2-story house near the main road. Mosi was leaning toward Nia in the exact way he used to lean toward Kadija when he wanted her to feel chosen. Kadija did not storm in. She stood outside under the dim security light and watched Nia laugh, watched Mosi touch her wrist. Watched him become a slightly better version of himself in the presence of money. More charming, more polished, more ambitious. When she confronted him the next day, he did not deny it for long. "I am trying to build a future," he said. Kadija stared at him. By lying, by surviving. The word had made her physically cold. He went on talking faster as if speed could make betrayal sound reasonable. Nia's family could connect him, help him, lift him. He cared for Kadija, he said, but caring did not change reality. He was tired of small lives and smaller chances. He wanted more. "And I?" Kadija asked quietly. "What was I?" Mosi looked away. That was answer enough. After that, she stopped confusing need with love. When her mother died 8 months later from an infection that should have been treatable, but became fatal Because treatment cost more than they had, Kadija buried whatever softness remained from girlhood beside her. Grief did not make her colder exactly. It made her clearer. She sold nearly everything they owned that could be sold. She left school. She took over the market stall full-time. She learned which wholesalers cheated, which police officers extorted, which nurses might quietly tell her where to buy medicine cheaper, and which men mistook a poor woman's silence for availability. She learned to stand without support. She learned to carry Jabari when his weakness flared. She learned that dignity was expensive and must be protected like hidden money. That was why the kneeling man unsettled her now, because something about him did not fit the usual pattern. A performer would have looked around to harvest the crowd's reaction. A manipulator would have reached for her hand, already forcing intimacy before permission. A desperate fool would have begged loudly enough to make refusal look cruel. This man only waited. His hand trembled slightly where he held the ring up. His face lifted toward her carried no smugness, no entitlement, only strain like a rope pulled too tight. Why, she asked at last. The market quieted just enough for the question to land. He swallowed. Because I think you are the kind of woman who sees clearly. A few people laughed again, but more softly this time. Kadija's expression did not change. You don't know me. I know enough to ask. That was not a clever answer. It was not polished. It irritated her for being almost sincere. Behind her, Jabari started coughing. The sound ripped through the moment like torn cloth. Kadija turned instinctively, steadying him with one hand until the fit passed. When she looked back, the man's face had changed. Not theatrically, not with false pity, with real concern and something else she could not name. He noticed Jabari. Most people noticed only trouble. The crowd began losing patience with the silence. Someone shouted for her to reject him so everyone could return to business. A woman near the yam stall called out that poor men loved marriage because they needed another worker in the house. More laughter followed. Kadija looked down at the ring. It was simple, cheap probably, but polished clean. That detail struck her harder than it should have. A careless man would bring a dirty ring and call it romance. A proud man would borrow something flashy to create pressure. This man had brought something humble and treated it with care. Her heart did not soften, but it paused. And in that pause, Kadija understood something that made her more uneasy than the proposal itself. Whether this man was honest, foolish, manipulative, broken, or all four at once, his arrival was going to change something. Maybe her life, maybe only her peace. Either way, the change had already begun. The market did not forgive hesitation. Silence in a poor place was dangerous because people rushed to fill it with laughter, advice, suspicion, or cruelty. The moment Kadija failed to answer immediately, voices rose around her from every side like birds startled out of dry grass. Say no and let us work. Ask him if he owns even one mattress. Kadija don't inherit another hungry mouth. Someone laughed so hard he had to wipe tears from his face. A woman balancing smoked fish on her head clicked her tongue and said loudly that a desperate man would promise the moon if he thought a hard-working girl could feed him for free. Tendai remained on one knee. Dust clung to the hem of his trousers. Sweat moved slowly down the side of his face. He could feel the crowd trying to crush the moment into something ugly, something cheap, something public and humiliating. That had been part of the gamble. He had chosen the market because poverty stripped romance down to its bones. Here people respected only what could survive ridicule. If Kadija said yes in front of witnesses who had nothing to gain from politeness, then perhaps her answer would mean something. But as the jeers sharpened, he began to see the cruelty of the scene through her eyes instead of his own. He had put her in a trap. Whether she accepted or refused, everyone would remember this moment. Men would talk about it. Women would repeat it over charcoal stoves. Children would imitate it badly in the alleys. He had not only tested her, he had dragged her dignity into public judgment. That unsettled him. Kadija, meanwhile, looked not at the crowd, but at him. "What is your name?" she asked. The question startled the nearest onlookers into brief quiet. Tendai kept his voice low, careful, plain. Tayo. It was one of the names Sefu had prepared for this identity. Short, forgettable, common enough to pass anywhere. Tendai had used it before. For some reason, speaking it to Kadija felt different from speaking it to other women. Dirtier, almost. As if the lie itself had more weight now. Kadija studied his face with unnerving steadiness. And why would a man named Tayo come to a market to ask a woman he barely knows to marry him? Because sometimes, he said, improvising around the truth, you can watch people for a long time before you speak to them. A few people snorted. One old man said that watching women from a distance was not romance, but idleness. More laughter followed. Tendai ignored it. Kadija's eyes narrowed slightly. Watching is not knowing. No, he admitted. But it tells you where to start. She folded her arms. And what do you think you know? He could have said many things. That she shared food even when she did not have enough. That she protected her brother without turning his sickness into theater. That she carried exhaustion with discipline, not complaint. That she had a face a weaker man might romanticize, but it was her restraint that held him. That after months of manufactured encounters and polished lies from elegant women, one honest glance from her had felt more dangerous than desire. Instead, he chose the smallest truth he could safely give. "I think you are careful," he said, "and I think careful people don't laugh at weakness." The words landed harder than he intended. Kadija's expression did not soften, but the mocking woman with the smoked fish fell briefly quiet, as if she too understood the accusation hiding inside that sentence. Jabari coughed again behind the stall, longer this time. Kadija turned at once and knelt beside him, rubbing his back until the worst passed. Tendai rose instinctively to help, then caught himself and stayed where he was. A poor man without history could not step too close too fast. That was one of Sefu's rules. Need made women cautious. Over-familiarity ruined believability. When Kadija stood, she had made a decision not about marriage, but about the shape of the conversation. "Get up," she said. He rose. "You will not kneel in front of me like this again." A murmur passed through the crowd. Some took it as rejection and began smiling in anticipation. Kadija lifted her chin slightly. "If a man wants to speak to me seriously, he speaks standing." That surprised Tendai enough that for half a second he forgot to respond. This was not the reaction he expected. Not acceptance, not refusal, but a correction, a reclaiming of control. "All right," he said. She glanced around at the crowd, then reached under the stall for her old ledger tin. She slid the day's earnings inside, wrapped a cloth over the fruit, and told Jabari to sit in the shade near Mama Efua's spice table. The older woman who sold pepper and dried crayfish 2 rows over frowned but nodded. She had known Kadija's mother and sometimes watched Jabari when things became difficult. Then Kadija stepped away from the stall and motioned with one hand. "Walk," she said. The market erupted. She is taking him to reject him properly. Maybe she wants to make sure he has both ears before she insults him. Kadija, don't come back with another husband made of dust. But Kadija ignored them and walked toward the narrow side lane beside the public water tap, where cracked cement walls gave a little shade, and the noise from the main path dulled into a rough hum. Tendai followed. The lane smelled of wet stone, pepper, and rusted metal. At the far end, a broken plastic chair leaned against the wall. A faded political poster peeled in strips near a drain. It was private enough to speak, public enough to stay safe. Smart, Tendai thought. Always smart. Kadija turned to face him. "Speak now," she said, "without drama." He almost smiled at that, but stopped himself. You think I used drama? You dropped to your knees in a crowded market with a ring. That is drama. Fair. He drew in a breath. I don't have family nearby. I do odd jobs. Some days construction, some days loading trucks, some days nothing. I rent a room not far from the old transport depot. All lies layered over fragments of truth. He knew the district. He knew the depot. He had even rented such a room before for one of the tests. But saying it now to her made him feel the falseness in his own mouth. Kadija listened without interrupting. I have watched you for some time, he continued. Not in a bad way. I saw how you work, how you care for your brother, how you treat people who cannot repay you. I thought, if I ever ask any woman to build a life with me, it should be a woman who knows hardship and still keeps her heart. Kadija's gaze sharpened. A woman who knows hardship is not a reward for a man who is tired. The sentence hit with such precision that Tendai felt it in his chest. I didn't mean, I know what you meant. Her voice stayed calm, which somehow made it more cutting. You saw a poor woman working hard and imagined she would make a good wife because she is already trained to suffer. No. Then tell me what marriage means to you. He opened his mouth and found for one dangerous second that he did not know which answer belonged to Tayo and which belonged to himself. Marriage once had meant legacy, stability, a public union strong enough to quiet the loneliness that money deepened instead of healing. Later it had become a negotiation, then a suspicion, then finally a test he administered to others while pretending he remained untouched by the result. Now standing in a narrow lane beside a dripping public tap, he heard himself answer more honestly than planned. It means not facing life alone, he said. Kadija did not blink. That is not enough. He frowned. Why? Because a wife is not medicine for a man's loneliness. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Somewhere in the market, a child shouted over spilled groundnuts. A radio played a gospel chorus too softly to make out the words. A motorcycle coughed, stalled, then coughed again. Tendai had built entire companies by anticipating resistance. He knew how to persuade boards, regulators, investors, journalists. He knew how to win with pressure strategy, silence, data, charm. Yet this one woman in a faded dress was undoing his arguments with simple moral clarity. He changed direction. What would be enough, he asked. Kadija's answer came slowly, as if she had earned each word the hard way. Responsibility, she said. Truth. Work. Respect. A man who does not vanish when life turns ugly. A man who does not use promises like bait. A man who does not make a woman choose between her dignity and survival. The mention of survival brought Jabari to the front of Tendai's mind again. The boy's cough was not ordinary. Even a non-doctor could hear that. Chronic, deep, dangerous. So that is what matters most, he asked. Responsibility. For me. She nodded once. Yes, because love without responsibility is just hunger wearing perfume. It was one of the most striking things anyone had said to him in years. He filed it away reflexively, the way he filed every important detail. But unlike the details from his previous tests, this one did not feel like evidence. It felt like judgment. Kadija looked at him for another long moment, then spoke again. If this is a game, leave now. It isn't. If you are drunk on fantasy, leave now. I'm not. If you want a woman to save you from your life, leave now. He hesitated too long before answering, and she noticed. That irritated him. Not because she was wrong, but because she saw too much. I am not asking to be saved, he said. No. Her eyes held his. Then why did you choose me instead of a woman with less burden? He knew the true answer, because burden reveals character. because he trusted struggle more than polish, because women surrounded by comfort had disappointed him too many times, because some ugly part of him believed a poor woman would be easier to read when temptation came. But to say any of that would expose more than he could allow. So he gave her another partial truth. Because I thought you were honest. That made her almost angry. Honest women are not born to be tested. The words stopped him cold. He stared at her. Kadija seemed to realize she had said more than she intended. A shadow crossed her face, brief but real. Something old, something wounded. Then it was gone. Good, Tendai thought. Not because she was hurt, but because hurt made people reveal structure. His mind still worked that way even now. Especially now. She drew a steadying breath. I will not answer your proposal today. The sentence hung between them. Then, when he asked before he could stop himself, her expression hardened again at the eagerness in his voice. You are in a hurry for a man with nothing. That almost made him laugh, but there was no room for laughter in this conversation. Kadija continued. You say you want responsibility, truth, respect. Fine. Then prove you understand what those words cost. How she lifted her chin. 30 days, she said. Not romance, not touching, not sweet words. You live honestly. You show me who you are when there is no performance. You do not control me. You do not interfere with how I care for Jabari. You do not ask me to abandon my work. You do not tell me what a wife should endure. And after 30 days, I decide whether your proposal deserves an answer. Tendai stared at her. This was nothing like the script he had imagined. He was supposed to set the terms, build the test, control the environment. Instead, Kadija had taken the proposal, stripped out its theatrics, and turned it back on him. And if I agree, he asked quietly, then you will learn something. Her voice remained level. Maybe about me. Maybe about yourself. For the first time in a very long time, Tendai felt something dangerously close to uncertainty. Not strategic uncertainty, not the calculated risk he enjoyed in business, moral uncertainty, because hidden inside Kadija's conditions was a threat far greater than rejection. If he accepted the test, would no longer belong only to him. For the first time since he began testing women, Tendai walked into a trial he did not fully control. That alone disturbed him. He had spent years building systems around uncertainty. In business, uncertainty could be priced, measured, shifted, absorbed. Even human weakness could often be predicted if you watched long enough. But Kadija's conditions had stripped him of the advantage he relied on most distance. He was no longer observing from behind disguise and design. He had agreed to step inside her life, and her life was not neat enough to study from safety. 3 days after the market proposal, Tendai moved into the room behind Kadija's stall-side district house. Calling it a house was generous. It was a 2-room structure made of patched cement blocks and corrugated roofing so worn that sunlight pierced through in tiny, merciless needles during the hottest part of the day. The front room served as everything sitting room, eating space, sleeping space for Jabari when his coughing grew too violent for Kadija to rest. The back room, smaller and darker, held a narrow mattress, 1 wooden box for clothes, a dented basin, and a shelf lined with medicine bottles so empty they looked accusatory. Tendai had seen poverty before. He had funded charity campaigns in neighborhoods like this. He had toured worker housing, inspected informal settlements near development sites, and written checks in boardrooms where executives discussed community realities with grave faces and filtered water on the table. None of that resembled standing inside Kadija's room at dawn and hearing the roof creak above him while a child struggled to breathe 10 feet away. The first morning he woke to the scrape of a blade against wood. Kadija was already crouched on the floor, slicing overripe plantains into thin strips for frying before she left for the market. A charcoal stove glowed near the doorway. Her movements were quick and economical, her head wrapped in a faded blue scarf, her face still swollen with sleep, but her body already disciplined by labor. Jabari sat against the wall, wrapped in a blanket, reading from an old school book with a finger pressed under each line. Every few breaths his chest tightened. Every few pages he stopped to cough. Tendai sat up on the reed mat laid for him in the back room. Kadija did not look around. "If you fetch water, fetch it now. The queue grows after sunrise." There was no softness in her tone, no house-welcome warmth, only instructions. He almost answered like the man he truly was. He almost said, "I have never fetched water from a public tap in my adult life." Instead, he rose, took the yellow jerrycan by the door and nodded. Outside, the lane was already awake. Women in wrappers and plastic slippers moved with basins balanced on their heads. Motorbikes coughed through puddles left by the night rain. A radio played high-life music somewhere beyond the next block. Children in faded uniforms dragged themselves toward school, some laughing, some already tired. At the tap, a line had formed. Tendai joined it and felt eyes move across him, new man, unfamiliar face, living with Kadija. He kept his posture loose, shoulders rounded, head slightly lowered. Tayo, the poor laborer. Tayo, the man with no visible power. Two women ahead of him began talking just loudly enough to be heard. So she really brought him home. Men arrive with empty pockets and full appetite. At least this one is quiet. Quiet men are often the most dangerous. Tendai said nothing. He returned with the water and found Kadija helping Jabari button his shirt. The boy's fingers trembled slightly with weakness. "You shouldn't go to school today," Kadija murmured. Jabari frowned. "I missed yesterday. You were coughing blood yesterday. It was not much." Tendai stopped mid-step. Kadija glanced up sharply as if regretting the sentence the second it escaped. She took the jerrycan from him and poured some water into a basin. Jabari saw the expression on Tendai's face and attempted a brave grin. "It looks worse than it is." Kadija did not smile. "No, it doesn't." The room quieted. Tendai had enough self-control to keep from asking too many questions too quickly, but inside his mind was already moving. Blood in the cough, prolonged weakness, interrupted treatment, possibly a chronic lung condition, possibly something worse. He knew enough through his hospital investments to understand what poverty did to illness. It did not merely delay treatment. It distorted everything around it: food, sleep, schooling, mood, choices, dignity. Kadija handed him a small tin plate of fried plantain and weak tea without sugar. "We leave in 10 minutes," she said. "Eat?" He did. The tea was thin and smoky. The plantain was half sweet, half bitter, where the fruit had started to turn. Yet Tendai noticed something almost unbearable in the arrangement Kadija had given him: 3 slices herself, 2, and Jabari 4, despite the boy's tiny appetite. She was counting strength, not fairness. At the market, the reaction to his continued presence was immediate. People stared first, then pretended not to. Mama Afua raised one brow so high it nearly disappeared into her headscarf. The fish seller laughed and asked whether the groom had survived his first night of romance in paradise. A man selling phone chargers offered Tendai day labor unloading cement if marriage had not made his hands too soft. Kadija ignored all of them. She set up the stall, arranged oranges, guavas, and pawpaws with mechanical focus, then sent Jabari to sit under the awning with his book and a bottle of water. Tendai tried to help. At first, he genuinely did not know how. He lifted crates badly with the posture of a man trained by chairs instead of work. He tied a tarp knot so useless that the cloth slipped loose in minutes. He stacked fruit for display in neat corporate symmetry rather than in the careful visual pattern that made bruised produce less obvious. Kadija watched in silence until silence itself became humiliation. Finally, she took a pineapple from his hand and said, "Have you done any labor in your life?" The answer, ironically, was yes. His childhood before wealth had not been easy. but years of tailored living had softened the memory into concept. The body forgets certain truths when money starts solving them. "I have done some," he replied. "Then either your memory is weak or your honesty is." The line cut deeper because he deserved it. By midday, heat pressed down over the market like a hand. Dust clung to sweat. The smell of diesel overripe fruitfish brine and hot metal fused into one thick breath. Business was poor. 2 customers argued over prices and left without buying. One woman accused Kadija of hiding the best oranges for richer clients. Another tried to take fruit on credit and grew offended when Kadija refused. Through it all, Tendai watched what work had carved into her life. Kadija did not merely sell fruit. She negotiated survival every few minutes. She calculated who could be trusted, who would lie, who might steal who needed mercy, and who would punish mercy by exploiting it. She tracked stock quality with a glance. She noticed when Jabari's cough changed tone. She knew which hours were most dangerous for spoilage and which vendors would lend a basin or knife without turning it into gossip. Near afternoon, a small incident exposed more than Tendai expected. A thin girl, perhaps 9, in a torn green dress, stood near the stall staring at the bananas. Not moving, just staring. Kadija kept serving customers. She did not call the girl out. She did not shame her. At last, when the crowd thinned, she picked 2 bananas, too bruised to sell by evening, and placed them in the girl's hands. "Walk away before someone sees you standing here like trouble," she said. The girl fled without a word. Tendai looked at Kadija. "You do that often." Kadija did not pause in wiping the stall board. "Often enough." "You lose money. I lose fruit. There is a difference." That sentence sat with him for a long time. Late in the day, Kwame arrived in the market dressed plainly enough to pass as an ordinary office worker, but still too clean for the neighborhood. He did not come close. He only crossed once near the fabric row, giving the smallest glance in Tendai's direction. A check-in. A question. "Do you want out?" Tendai turned away before Kwame could interpret anything from his face. He had arranged with his assistant that there would be no interference unless he signaled, no emergencies unless real danger arose. But the mere sight of Kwame, a man who knew the towers, the board meetings, the imported suits, the true architecture of Tendai's life, made the disguise feel suddenly unstable, fragile, offensive even. That discomfort worsened at sunset. Back at the house, Jabari's fever climbed. His breathing became shallow, then ragged. Kadija tried to hide her alarm, but her hands betrayed her. She fumbled the medicine bottle cap twice. When she lifted the spoon to Jabari's lips, her wrist shook. "How long has this been happening?" Tendai asked. Kadija did not answer immediately. "How long?" he repeated more gently. She set the spoon down. "Long enough." "What did the clinic say?" "That he needs tests. And tests cost money." The words were simple, but rage moved through Tendai so suddenly that he had to turn away. Not at her, at the machinery of it, at the familiarity, at the fact that in a city where his company operated private hospitals with polished lobbies and scented waiting rooms, a child could sit in a dark room swallowing half doses because tests cost money. He knelt beside Jabari. The boy's skin was hot. Too hot. Kadija stepped forward, instantly protective. "Don't." Tendai looked up. "I'm only checking his temperature." I said, "Don't." Something flashed between them. Then not romance, not gratitude, but conflict. Raw and immediate. "You don't trust me," he said. Kadija's face hardened. "Trust is expensive. We are on day 6. He almost told her the truth. That he could call a specialist in 10 minutes. That he owned machines that could scan this boy's lungs before midnight. That one instruction from him could shift money. Medicine beds doctors' entire systems. That the helplessness she saw in him was theater. Instead, he swallowed it, because to reveal that truth now would end the trial and expose the lie beneath it. So he did the crueler thing, the more disciplined thing. He remained Tayo. That night, rain hammered the roof until conversation became useless. Water slipped through 2 holes into bowls Kadija placed beneath them, without complaint. Jabari finally slept in brief, feverish bursts. Tendai lay awake in the back room, listening to the storm and to the intermittent coughs that kept cutting through it. Near midnight, he heard movement in the front room. He rose quietly. Kadija was not there. The door stood half open. For 1 sharp second, his mind produced a dozen possibilities. Panic, theft, breakdown, escape. He stepped outside into the wet dark and saw her at the end of the lane beneath the weak yellow light near the junction. She was speaking to a man in a white shirt beside a motorbike. The man handed her folded cash. Kadija took it. Then, with her face turned partly away, she pressed a cloth hard against the crook of her arm. Tendai froze. When she returned a minute later, he was back inside, seated on the edge of his mat as if he had never moved. But his pulse had turned violent. The cloth, the hidden exchange, the money, the drained way she carried her body afterward. He knew what he had seen. Kadija was selling blood to buy medicine for Jabari. And for the first time since beginning this entire cruel experiment, Tendai felt not curiosity, not strategic tension, not wounded suspicion, but shame. Tendai did not sleep after that. Rain kept drumming over the corrugated roof in relentless bursts, but even when the storm softened near dawn, his mind did not. He lay on the thin mat in the back room, staring into darkness, replaying the image again and again, Kadija under the weak junction light shoulders rigid with exhaustion, accepting folded cash with one hand while pressing cloth to the inside of her other arm. Selling blood, not for vanity, not for debt from foolishness, not for some secret addiction or hidden indulgence, for medicine, for Jabari, for the right to keep a boy breathing 1 more week. The knowledge lodged in Tendai like a splinter under skin, tiny, constant, impossible to ignore. He had told himself many things over the years to make peace with his tests, that he was searching for truth, that the world had already lied to him, so he was justified in stripping lies away from others, that women who failed his tests were not being harmed, only revealed, that if their greed surfaced, it had always existed. He merely gave it a stage. But lying in that dark room while water dripped into a bowl near the door, he felt something he had spent years avoiding. What if the test itself was the corruption? What if forcing wounded people to prove their goodness under pressure was not wisdom, but cruelty, disguised as discernment? He turned on his side and heard Jabari cough in his sleep, deep and tearing. The boy whimpered once without waking. In the front room, Kadija shifted on the floor mat beside him. Always half alert, even in sleep, the way poor caregivers learned to rest without surrender. By morning, Tendai had made 2 decisions. The first was immediate. He would get money into the house, somehow enough to cover the next medicine refill, without exposing himself. The second was darker. He would continue the test he had designed with Kwame, but now it no longer felt like a game he could enjoy winning. It felt like a blade he had already set in motion and no longer knew how to stop without cutting everyone involved. The day began badly. Jabari woke with a low fever and a cough so violent it bent him forward over the basin until strings of blood-tinged mucus stained the water. Kadija's face went still in the most alarming way possible. Tendai had noticed that about her. She showed fear not by panicking, but by becoming unnaturally calm. "You are not going to school," she told Jabari. The boy opened his mouth to protest, but she cut him off. "No." He fell silent. Kadija wrapped him into clean shirt, dampened a cloth for his forehead, and checked the near-empty medicine bottle. Then she looked toward the shelf where a small tin once held emergency cash. Empty. Tendai saw her see it. She did not curse. She did not collapse. She only inhaled once long and controlled, then tied her headscarf tighter and lifted the fruit basin for market. "I'll stay with him," Tendai said. Kadija's gaze flicked toward him. There was suspicion there, but also arithmetic. She could not take Jabari to the market in that condition. She could not miss a full sales day. She could not be in two places at once. "You will not give him anything except what I leave." Measured, she said. "You will not let him go outside. If his fever rises, send Kofi's daughter from the next room to call me." Tendai nodded. After she left, the room changed. Kadija's presence carried order, even when that order was made of scraps and endurance. Without her, the house felt smaller, more exposed. Jabari lay on the front mat with his breathing shallow and uneven, trying to look braver than he felt. Tendai sat nearby on the low stool and handed him water when the cough eased enough to swallow. The boy studied him with surprising directness. "You're not what you say," Jabari said at last. Tendai's shoulders tensed. "What do you mean?" Jabari shrugged weakly. "Your hands? My hands. They don't belong to a man who has done hard work all his life." He lifted one thin hand and rubbed at his chest. "You try, but sometimes you carry things like they are strange to you." Tendai forced a faint smile. "Maybe I have been unlucky with the kinds of jobs I get. Maybe." Jabari's eyes narrowed slightly. He was younger than his illness made him seem, but not foolish. Kadija sees more than she says. Tendai looked away. "I know," he murmured. Jabari coughed again, then lay still for a moment, gathering strength. "She won't marry for pity." "I didn't ask for pity. I didn't say you did." The boy's voice dropped. "I'm saying don't bring her trouble if you're not serious." Something in the sentence spoken by a feverish child on a mat in a leaking room shamed Tendai more than any boardroom accusation ever had. "I hear you," he said. "Yuhi." Around midday, Mama Efua came by with pepper soup in a dented flask, clucked disapprovingly at Jabari's breathing, and gave Tendai the long, measuring stare of an older woman who trusted nothing easily. "You," she said, pointing a bent finger at him, "if you are one of those men who arrive with sweet eyes and leave with a woman's peace, may the same road swallow you." Tendai almost laughed at the force of it, but the look on her face killed the impulse. "I am not here to harm her," he said. Mama Efua sniffed. That is what harmful men always say before they become stories. When she left the room, fell quiet again. At 2:00, Tendai stepped outside under pretense of buying bread and walked to the far end of the lane where the reception was better. He pulled out the cheap phone tied to his false identity and dialed a number from memory. Kwame answered on the second ring. "Sir, don't call me that on this line." A beat. "Understood. I need cash placed through the pharmacy on Kojo Street. Anonymous credit. Enough for 3 weeks of medication under Kadija Musa's name." Kwame was silent for half a second too long. "You want me to intervene directly," murmured quietly. "It must look like community assistance or a cleared debt. Nothing traceable to me. Done." Another pause. And the next stage, Tendai closed his eyes briefly. The next stage, he had scheduled it before moving into Kadija's life, back when everything still felt clean and deliberate from a strategic distance. Kwame would appear in a few days as a well-connected businessman named Nuru Mensah, a generous, polished man with resources, confidence, and immediate solutions. He would notice Kadija's struggle. He would offer help for Jabari. He would make it easy, painfully easy for her to walk away from a poor man with no future and choose comfort. At the time, Tendai had considered it the final proof, the last and most necessary temptation. Now it felt monstrous. Yet he heard himself say, "Proceed." Kwame did not respond immediately this time either. He knew Tendai well enough to sense hesitation when it appeared. "Are you sure?" The question irritated him because it came too close to conscience. "Yes. Understood." timing soon. But not at the house. Somewhere public. He ended the call before more could be said. On the walk back, he hated himself a little, not dramatically, not in the theatrical way guilty men sometimes enjoy their guilt. Just in the cold, intimate way one hates the part of oneself that has become too practiced at harm. The pharmacy credit worked by evening. Kadija returned from the market with dust on her face, a split in the hem of her dress, and worry braided tightly between her brows. When she checked the medicine shelf and found a fresh packet with her name scribbled on the paper wrap, she froze. "What is this?" Tendai kept his expression blank. "Maybe the pharmacist allowed you to pay later." Kadija stared at the packet as if it might expose a trap if she looked long enough. "He never allows that. Maybe someone helped?" She turned sharply. "Who?" He lifted a shoulder. How would I know that did not satisfy her? Nothing invisible ever satisfied poor people, because invisible help often came attached to visible humiliation later. She inspected the packet again, then gave Jabari his dose with careful reluctance, as if even relief could not yet be trusted. That night, after Jabari slept, Kadija finally spoke. They sat on opposite sides of the front room, while lantern light shook faintly against the walls. Outside, neighbors argued over water buckets, and a baby cried in the next compound. "You saw me last night," she said. It was not a question. Tendai did not answer at once. Kadija held his gaze. At the junction. He could lie. Pretend ignorance. Protect her pride by letting the moment vanish unspoken. But something in her tone made lies feel especially cowardly. "Yes," he said quietly. For a long moment she looked at the floor rather than at him. When she finally spoke, her voice had no self-pity in it at all, which made it more painful to hear. "Do you know what humiliation is?" she asked. He almost answered with old arrogance, with something abstract and broad. Instead, he remained silent. She continued, still not looking up. "It is not just when people insult you. It is when life pushes you so far that your body itself becomes a thing you trade. Piece by piece. Blood, sleep, pride, strength, hope. You keep cutting from yourself because there is nothing else left to sell." The lantern hissed softly. "I didn't want Jabari to know," she said. "And now you know, too." Tendai swallowed. "Kadija, no." She raised a hand. "I'm not telling you for sympathy. I'm telling you because if you stay in this house for 30 days, then you should understand the cost of the things you speak about so easily. Responsibility," he said. "Yes. Truth. Yes. Respect." At that, she finally looked at him. "Especially respect." His chest tightened. He wanted for one irrational second to blurt out everything. "I can help. I am not what you think. I have hospitals. I have money. I can fix this." He wanted the relief of confession, the power of immediate rescue, but confession now would not be clean. It would not be noble. It would reveal that every vulnerable thing she had shown him, every humiliating truth she had trusted him enough not to hide completely, had been shown to a man already holding a mask. So he did the only thing available to a coward, trying to feel honorable. He stayed silent. Kadija misread the silence as helplessness, and looked away again, her face hardening to protect itself. 2 days later, stage 6 began. It happened at the market just after the fiercest heat broke and shadows started leaning long across the stalls. A black SUV rolled slowly past the fabric row, not flashy enough to scream obscene wealth, but far too polished for that district. It stopped near the pharmacy kiosk. A tall man stepped out in a cream shirt, dark trousers, and expensive shoes dust could not quite humble. Kwame, no Nuru Mensa, as the market would know him. He moved with the kind of ease money teaches men, early, unhurried, confident, used to being welcomed before speaking. Heads turned immediately. Vendors straightened. One boy ran to offer bottled water. Another asked whether he was lost. Nuru smiled, politely declined, and let his gaze travel until it settled exactly as arranged on Kadija's stall. Tendai felt a violent, immediate regret, because from the first second he could already see the danger. Kwama playing Nuru did not look like temptation in the crude sense. He looked like rescue, and rescue was far more difficult to refuse. Nuru approached the stall, glanced once at Jabari's pale face beneath the awning, then back at Kadija. "Excuse me," he said, in a voice smooth enough to soothe and command at once. "I believe someone told me you are the sister of a very sick boy." Kadija stiffened, Tendai standing half a step behind the fruit crates in his faded clothes, and ordinary silence felt something cold move through him. The trap had opened, and this time he was no longer certain which of them it was truly meant for. The market changed the moment Nuru Mensah smiled at Kadija. It was subtle at first, a pause in bargaining, a slight leaning in from neighboring stalls. The quick, almost involuntary silence that rises around money when money appears in a place that rarely sees it up close. Even the dust seemed to settle differently. Nuru stood before the fruit stall like a man entirely at ease with being watched. His shirt was cream linen light enough for the heat cut with the kind of quiet precision that signaled cost without vulgarity. His shoes were polished. His watch was expensive in the disciplined way of rich men who no longer need their wealth to shout. Kadija straightened slowly. Jabari, weak beneath the awning, lowered his book and stared. Tendai felt something ugly ignite behind his ribs. He had designed this, chosen the timing, approved the details. Yet seeing the scene unfold in real life made the plan feel far more predatory than it ever had on paper. Nuru did not simply represent wealth, he represented immediate relief medicine, food safety transport options. Everything poverty teaches people not to believe in unless it is standing directly in front of them. And now it was. Kadija wiped her hands on the side of her dress before answering. "Who told you that?" she asked. Nuru's expression softened in a perfectly measured way. "A pharmacist mentioned your name when I was asking about community medical needs." He gave the stall a brief, respectful glance. "He also said you work too hard for someone carrying this much alone." It was a good line. Too good. Tendai hated it instantly. Kadija did not melt under it. That much relieved him. But she did not dismiss Nuru either. Her caution sharpened, yes, yet behind it, Tendai could already see the first dangerous crack hope trying not to be born. "What do you want?" she asked. Nuru did not answer directly. "May I buy some fruit first?" Without waiting for permission, he selected oranges, bananas, and one pawpaw. He paid double the price Kadija named. When she tried to return the excess, he lifted a hand. "Keep it. I don't take gifts from strangers." "It is not a gift," he said smoothly. "It is poor mathematics on my part." A few people nearby laughed softly, charmed despite themselves. Kadija remained unmoved. "Then I will keep only what the fruit costs." She counted the correct change into his palm. That small act, a poor woman refusing easy money in front of everyone, did more to alter the atmosphere than any dramatic speech could have. Tendai saw Mama Efua 3 stalls away stop pretending not to watch. Nuru seemed to notice the shift, too. "Would you allow me a conversation after the market closes?" he asked. "About your brother?" "No." The answer came fast enough to surprise even Tendai. Nuru did not retreat. "I'm not here to insult you. Men with cars like that do not come to places like this to help without a reason." He gave a slight nod, as if respecting the suspicion. "Fair. Then let me be plain. I fund medical cases sometimes." Quietly. "Your brother looks unwell. I may be able to assist." Jabari lowered his gaze, at once embarrassed to have his sickness spoken aloud in public. Kadija noticed and stepped subtly to block him from view. "We manage," she said. Nuru glanced at the medicine packet near the stall leg, then at her face again. "Do you?" The question was gentle, That made it crueler. Tendai's hands tightened at his sides. He had written these contours himself. Gentle pressure. No obvious coercion. Just enough truth to force the wound open. Kadija's voice cooled. If you came to buy fruit, buy fruit. If you came to study my problems, go. Nuru inclined his head. Then I'll go for now, but not because I believe you are all right. He took a card from his pocket and placed it on the wooden edge of the stall. No flashy logo, just a name, a private number, and the discreet insignia of a charitable foundation Tendai had used before for public donations. If your brother worsens, Nuru said, call me before pride kills him. Then he turned and walked back toward the SUV. The sentence hit the market like a slap. Kadija stood rigid. Tendai's heart lurched, not because the line was wrong strategically, but because it was too sharp, too invasive. The kind of line that could either break through or leave a scar. The SUV drove away. Only after it disappeared did the noise return. It returned all at once. Women started whispering. Men speculated about Nuru's identity. One boy said only rich men from the city moved with that kind of boredom. Another swore he had seen the same vehicle near a minister's compound. Mama Efua muttered that help from powerful men was like fish with bright eyes you must check the smell before cooking it. Kadija said nothing. She kept selling fruit through the remaining hour of daylight, but Tendai noticed the change in her rhythm. She misplaced an orange twice, overcounted once and corrected herself, looked toward Jabari more often than usual. Her body was still disciplined, but her mind was elsewhere now, dragged unwillingly toward the possibility Nuru had placed in front of her. A possibility Tendai himself had manufactured. When the market finally thinned and the sky deepened into smoky gold, Kadija packed the unsold fruit in silence. Tendai lifted the heavier crate without being asked. She let him. That worried him more than anger would have. They walked home with Jabari between them. The boy tired quickly and leaned harder into Kadija after every few steps. At one point, Tendai reached instinctively for the basket on her head. She hesitated, then allowed him to take it. None of them spoke. Inside the house, dusk pooled in the corners before the lantern was lit. Kadija set water to boil, mixed a little cassava flour, and measured Jabari's medicine with precise hands. Only when the boy finally slept, curled on his side, and breathing unevenly did she sit down across from Tendai. The card lay on the floor between them. She had brought it home. That alone made Tendai's pulse change. You knew he was coming, Kadija said. The statement was so direct that for one terrifying second he thought the mask had cracked, but her eyes held suspicion, not certainty. Instinct. Pattern recognition. Not proof. What do you mean? He asked carefully. She folded her arms. Your face. He held still. My face. When he spoke, you looked angry before you looked surprised. Tendai forced himself not to react too fast. Maybe I didn't like the way he spoke to you. That answer landed, but not cleanly. Kadija studied him for a long moment, then looked down at the card. He can help Jabari. The room went tight. Tendai knew this conversation was the point of the entire stage. This was where temptation was meant to breathe. Not luxury, not romance, responsibility. A sick child. A practical door opening where none had existed. He says he can, Tendai replied. You don't believe him. I believe rich men often enjoy the feeling of saving people. Kadija's mouth hardened. And poor men often enjoy criticizing help they cannot provide. The sentence struck exactly where it was meant to. Tendai looked away first. She exhaled slowly, immediately ashamed of the harshness, but too tired to soften it. I'm sorry. No, he said quietly. You are tired. No. I was cruel. He almost laughed at the irony of that coming from her to him, but there was no laughter in him tonight. Kadija picked up the card and turned it over in her fingers. Do you know what I hate most? He said nothing. That I am even thinking about it. Her voice grew rougher. I hate that sickness makes you bargain with your own boundaries. I hate that every decision starts sounding moral until someone you love cannot breathe. Tendai felt shame move through him again, darker this time. He said pride could kill Jabari. She continued. I know why he said it. Because it is the kind of sentence that traps people like me. If I refuse help, I become proud. If I accept it, I become dependent. Either way, someone else defines my dignity. The lantern hissed softly. Outside, a neighbor laughed too loudly at something in the lane, and then the night quieted again. What will you do? Tendai asked. Kadija did not answer immediately. Instead, she asked a question of her own. If I left this house tomorrow, she said, if I took Jabari somewhere safer, somewhere cleaner, somewhere with doctors and medicine and no leaking roof, would that make me disloyal? There it was, the blade at the center of everything. Tendai kept his voice level with effort. To me, to your proposal, to these 30 days, to whatever it is you think we are testing. The truth rose to his tongue. Yes, that would end it. Yes, that would prove you chose rescue over loyalty. Yes, that would show me what I came to know. But another truth stood beside it now, harder to silence. If Jabari were truly at risk, what kind of woman would keep him in suffering just to preserve a symbolic loyalty to a man who could offer nothing? What kind of test punished responsibility? Kadija mistook his silence for judgment and went on, her voice lower now. When my mother was dying, people gave advice more than help. Pray more, wait more, trust more, be patient, be humble. Do you know what patience looked like? Her eyes lifted to his. It looked like infection spreading while we counted coins. Tendai said nothing. I will never watch someone I love die just to look honorable to the poor, she said. The words entered him like fire, not because they condemned him, because they were right, and in that brutal clarity, the whole architecture of his test shifted. He had imagined temptation in simple terms, wealth versus love, comfort versus character greed versus faithfulness. But Kadija was forcing the real question into the light. When survival stands on one side and loyalty on the other, which choice is moral? He had not designed for that, because he had never truly respected the difficulty of her world. Kadija looked down at the card again. Then, after a long silence, she placed it back on the floor between them. I will not call him tonight, she said. Relief moved through Tendai so quickly it disgusted him. But she was not finished. I will not call him, she repeated, because I will not make a decision from fear in the dark. But listen to me carefully, Tayo. Her gaze pinned him where he sat. If my brother's life reaches a point where I must choose between preserving your pride and saving him, I will not choose you. Tendai did not breathe. Kadija's voice stayed calm, unadorned, mercilessly honest. I do not love you yet. Maybe I do not even know you well enough to begin. But I know this, I would rather be accused of disloyalty than become the kind of person who abandons a sick child for the sake of moral theater. The sentence shattered something. Not his plan. Not yet. Something deeper. Because he realized in that moment that Kadija was not refusing Nuru for romance, not staying for attachment, not clinging to some soft dream of poor love proving itself pure. She was choosing principle, and the principle was not stand by your man. It was this: do not betray a person who has placed trust in you unless staying with that person requires betraying your responsibility to the innocent. That was not the answer Tendai wanted. It was in some ways far more devastating, because it meant Kadija was capable of leaving him if conscience demanded it. And that meant if she stayed now, she was not staying because she was weak, dazzled, dependent, or emotionally trapped. She was staying because she believed, however cautiously, that loyalty still mattered. Tendai swallowed hard. "Why are you telling me this?" Kadija leaned back, exhaustion finally visible in the set of her shoulders. "Because men are dangerous when they misunderstand a woman's sacrifice," she said. "If I stay, do not call it love too quickly, and do not call it submission. I am here because I refuse to become false, just because life is hard." Then she looked at him fully, and there was no softness in it at all. "So hear me clearly. I am not choosing poverty. I am choosing not to betray." Tendai felt the weight of the sentence settle through his entire body. He had wanted proof. He had imagined satisfaction. Instead, he sat in a dim room with a leaking roof, staring at the one woman who had done exactly what he claimed to be searching for, and all he felt was sorrow, because her honesty had not made him victorious. It had made him small. 3 mornings later, Tendai destroyed the last illusion with his own hands. He told himself he was doing it because the test had reached its natural end. He told himself Kadija had already answered the real question more clearly than anyone ever had. He told himself that prolonging the lie would only deepen the damage. All of that was true. None of it was the full truth. The fuller truth was uglier after what Kadija said that night after hearing her choose loyalty, not out of romance, but out of principle. Tendai could no longer bear standing before her as a poor man asking to be trusted while secretly holding power over every variable around her. Her honesty had turned his disguise into something indecent. The mask had begun to feel less like protection and more like theft. So on the 4th day after Nuru's visit, he told Kadija not to open the stall. That alone nearly caused a fight. "No," she said immediately, tying her headscarf before dawn. "We lost half a day yesterday because of the rain. I am not closing for your moods. It's not a mood. Then it is worse. It is a plan." Tendai stood in the doorway of the small room, already washed, already composed in a way that unsettled even him. He was still in Tayo's faded clothes, but something in his posture had shifted overnight. Less bent, less apologetic, more exact. Kadija noticed. Her eyes narrowed. What happened? He looked toward Jabari, who sat wrapped in a blanket near the wall, too weak to argue but alert enough to sense danger in the air. "I need you both to come with me," Tendai said. "No." "Kadija." "No." She rose fully and faced him. "You do not get to wake up and command my day. If this is another strange test of patience, keep it for yourself. It isn't. That is what men say right before they do something unforgivable." The sentence landed harder than usual because he knew how close it sat to the truth. Jabari coughed into his cloth and looked from one to the other. "What's happening?" Kadija answered, without taking her eyes off Tendai. "Nothing if he has any sense." Tendai drew a breath he did not need. He had negotiated billion-dollar contracts with steadier nerves than this. Yet convincing one exhausted woman to leave her house for a few hours felt more dangerous than any corporate risk he had ever taken. "If you come with me," he said carefully, "you will understand why I need you to." Kadija gave a short, humorless laugh. "That is not an answer. That is bait." He should have told her then plainly in the room. "I am Tendai Adebayo. I am not poor. I lied. I have been testing you. I am sorry." But some cowardly instinct still wanted context to carry the blow. Space. Distance from neighbors. Distance from the raw intimacy of that room. He feared confession there would make him look exactly what he was, a deceiver, standing over people who had trusted him in poverty. So he made the second worst decision of his life after beginning the test at all. He insisted. "There is a clinic visit for Jabari," he said. That made Kadija stop instantly. Entirely. What he hated himself as soon as he used the boy's sickness as leverage, even for what he believed would end in help. But the effect was immediate. Her anger dropped beneath sharper fear. What clinic, she asked. A specialist. Today. Her face changed so quickly it was almost painful to watch. Hope tried to rise and was strangled at once by suspicion. How I arranged it. With what money? Tendai said nothing. With what money, she repeated louder now. Jabari sat up straighter, breath hitching. Kadija stared at Tendai's face and saw something she had not seen clearly before. Not just secrecy, but containment. The kind of discipline poor men usually did not carry because poverty exposed too much of life too often. She took one step back. "Who are you?" she asked. The room went silent. For one long second, Tendai nearly answered. But once again disastrously, he chose sequence over honesty. "Come with me," he said. "Please." Kadija's expression hardened into something far colder than anger. "I knew it," she whispered. "Knew what that no ordinary man carries lies this carefully." She looked toward the door as if calculating whether to shout for neighbors. Tendai saw the thought form and raised both hands at once, palms open. "I am not going to hurt you." Men always say that just before they explain why their betrayal should be understood. The sentence cut clean. Jabari began coughing harder, the sound forcing urgency into the room. Kadija turned to him, instantly held the basin steadied. His shoulders rubbed his back. When the coughing finally eased, the boy sagged with exhaustion. That changed everything. Fear for herself could make Kadija stubborn. Fear for Jabari made her practical. She looked up at Tendai, eyes burning with distrust. "If this is a trap," she said, "may God judge you before I do." He nodded once. "Fair." They rode in silence. Not in the black SUV, he had more shame than that, but in a clean white sedan Kwame sent with a driver who asked no questions. Kadija sat in the back with Jabari leaning weakly against her shoulder. Tendai sat in front. No one spoke during the first 20 minutes. Accra moved around them in widening circles. The roads changed first, from broken district lanes to busier paved streets, from market chaos to central traffic. From rusted kiosks and patched roofs to office fronts, banks, manicured medians. Kadija noticed everything. Her silence sharpened with each kilometer. By the time they reached the private hospital entrance, a glass-fronted building with silver signage security barriers and a polished driveway, her face had gone still in the way it did when she was deciding whether to run or strike. The car stopped. A uniformed attendant opened the rear door at once. "Good morning," he said, bending slightly. We've been expecting. His eyes landed on Tendai, and in that instant everything broke. The attendant straightened so fast it was almost comic. "Sir, not friend, not boss in the informal neighborhood sense, not Mr. Sir." Kadija turned slowly toward Tendai. He got out first because his legs felt less stable than usual, then opened the door for her. She did not take his hand. Around them, the choreography of wealth began unfolding with horrifying speed. A hospital administrator hurried through the sliding doors. 2 nurses approached with a wheelchair for Jabari. The receptionist, visible through the glass, was already standing. Security guards at the entrance shifted posture recognition, flashing openly on their faces. Kadija did not move. "Tendai Adebayo," the administrator said breathlessly as he reached them. "We have the pulmonology team ready and—" He stopped mid-sentence when he saw Kadija's expression. She looked at Tendai as if his face had been torn off, and another one had been hiding underneath the whole time. Not shock alone. Violation. "Get away from me," she said. The words were quiet. That made them devastating. Jabari, half risen with confusion, looked between the adults. Kadija, but the machinery kept moving because institutions serve power faster than pain. A nurse gently insisted on taking Jabari inside because the specialist was waiting. The boy, overwhelmed and coughing again, let himself be transferred into the wheelchair. Kadija reached for him, automatically torn for one terrible second between following her brother and confronting the man who had detonated her reality. Tendai stepped back. "Go with Jabari." She did not thank him. She did not nod. She simply went, one hand gripping the wheelchair handle so tightly her knuckles whitened. And Tendai stood in the hospital entrance he partly owned, wearing borrowed clothes and the full weight of his own disgrace. The hours that followed turned public far faster than he intended. That, too, was his fault. He had chosen this hospital because the specialists were best, and the records could be expedited. He had underestimated how quickly his presence would travel through a building full of staff who knew exactly who he was. By mid-morning, whispers had already spread across departments. The CEO had arrived unexpectedly. He was not alone. There was a poor woman with him, a sick child. No one knew the story, which made everyone more eager to invent it. Kadija sat in the consultation suite while Jabari underwent scans and blood work. She barely heard the doctors. She answered when asked, signed forms, held her brother's hand. But inside, a much larger violence was unfolding. Every memory was rearranging itself in real time. The cracked sandals, the market proposal, the room behind her house, the quiet observations, the pharmacy miracle, Nuru's arrival, the careful silences, the strange way he carried certain things, the disciplined speech, the moments when his anger at rich men sounded too specific, too intimate, too informed. Not a poor man, not Tayo, a CEO, a liar. By noon, the private waiting lounge outside the executive conference room held more people than it should have. Kwame was there, face composed but uneasy. Sefu had arrived at Tendai's call and stood near the wall like a man who expected no forgiveness from anybody. Two senior managers lingered nearby, pretending they had unrelated reasons to be on that floor. Even the head of communications had appeared for a few minutes before wisely disappearing when she saw Tendai's expression. And then Kadija walked in. She had left Jabari resting with a nurse after the scans, but the fury on her face made everyone in the room fall silent at once. She was still wearing the same faded dress from home. That dress in that room of chilled air and polished wood and expensive silence said more than any accusation could have. Kwame stepped forward first. "Madam, please." Khadija's gaze hit him and froze him where he stood. "You," she said. Not a question. Recognition moved through her features with sickening speed. "Of course, Nuru." The polished rescuer at the market. The man with the card. The temptation. Kwame lowered his eyes. That was all the confirmation she needed. Kadija turned to Tendai. "So it was all of you?" No one spoke. "All of you," she repeated louder now, her voice starting to crack under the pressure of too many injuries at once. The poor man, the rich man, the helper, the observer, the silence, the medicine, the questions. She let out a short, disbelieving breath that sounded almost like a laugh. "Was there any part of my life you did not turn into a lesson?" Kadija Tendai said, stepping forward once. "Listen to me?" "No." The word snapped through the room. "You do not get to say my name like that." Her eyes blazed with humiliation so raw that even the managers who knew nothing of the full story looked away. "You watched my brother cough blood. You slept in my house. You listened while I told you what humiliation costs. And all that time you were not a struggling man asking for trust. You were a rich man measuring me. That's not what you were to me." "No," she shot back. "Then what was I?" Tendai opened his mouth. No clean answer existed. A proof, a hope, a wound, a mirror, a test. A woman he wanted to believe in, a person he had wronged before even understanding her value. All of it was true, and all of it sounded monstrous now. Kadija saw the failure before he spoke and smiled without warmth. "That's what I thought." One of the managers near the back shifted awkwardly. Another muttered something about giving privacy and began backing toward the door. But it was too late for privacy. The room itself had already become a courtroom. Tendai tried again, more desperate now. I was wrong. Yes, I should have told you sooner. Yes, I never meant to degrade you. At that, Kadija's composure finally broke. She laughed once, sharp-wounded, disbelieving. You brought me into your world surrounded by people who stand when you enter and bow when you speak. And you tell me you never meant to degrade me. She pointed around the room. Do you know what they see when they look at me now? Not a woman. Evidence. A poor girl who passed a rich man's private exam. The words hit every person present. No one denied them. Kadija stepped closer, and Tendai noticed then that her hands were shaking. That market proposal, she said, voice lower now, more dangerous for its quietness, was not romance. It was bait. Those 30 days were not honesty. They were surveillance. Nuru was not help. He was temptation sent to see whether I could be bought. You did not come into my life to love me. You came to grade me. Tendai's throat tightened. Kadija. Her eyes filled, but the tears did not fall. I sold blood while you studied my character. That sentence ended whatever defense he still imagined he had. Nothing in business had ever prepared him for the utter moral clarity of being named correctly by the person he harmed. He looked down. Around them, the executive suite remained deathly still. At last, Kadija drew a breath that sounded like something being held together by force. If Jabari were not here, she said, I would walk out of this building and never let you see my face again. Then she looked him straight in the eyes and delivered the true wound. You are not the only one who was tested. Tendai stared at her. Kadija's voice remained steady, now cold and bright as broken glass. I came here thinking maybe poverty had made you hard, maybe disappointment had made you cautious, maybe life had simply wounded you. I kept waiting to see whether hardship had left any goodness in you. She shook her head once. But wealth has made you cruel in a much cleaner suit. Silence followed. Not the soft silence of reflection. The hard silence that comes after judgment has already been passed. The room stayed silent long after Kadija stopped speaking. No one moved. No one dared. Tendai had stood in crisis meetings where billions were at risk in hostile negotiations, where rivals tried to strip his companies apart piece by piece in funeral halls, where powerful men lied with polished sympathy. He had learned how to hold posture under pressure, how to keep his face unreadable, how to survive public challenge without surrendering ground. None of that helped him now, because Kadija had not attacked his reputation. She had named his soul. And the worst part, the part that left him with nowhere to stand, was that she was right. Kwame shifted first, his voice careful and low. Sir, perhaps we should clear the room. Kadija turned sharply toward him. Don't call him that in front of me. Kwame fell silent at once. Tendai lifted one hand slightly, signaling everyone else to leave. The managers obeyed almost with relief. The administrator backed out. Even Sefu, who had seen too much from the beginning, hesitated only a second before stepping away and closing the executive lounge door behind him. Now only 3 people remained in the room. Tendai, Kadija, Kwame. Kadija looked at the assistant with open disgust. You too. Kwame lowered his head. Yes. You came to the market and looked at my brother the way hunters look at thirsty animals near a trap. The words struck him visibly. I'm sorry. Kadija's face hardened. Are you? Yes. For what? For doing it, or for being seen doing it? Kwame had no answer. Tendai finally spoke, his voice hoarse with a strain he could no longer hide. Leave us. Kwame looked at him once, then nodded and went. The door clicked shut behind him. For the first time since reaching the hospital, Kadija and Tendai stood entirely alone. It did not feel private. It felt final. Kadija folded her arms tightly across herself, not from cold, but from violation. She looked around the room, once the glass wall, the low leather chairs, the polished table, the bottled water arranged with sterile perfection. And Tendai understood with fresh nausea how obscene this setting must feel to her. She had come from a leaking room and a fruit stall into the private, air-conditioned world of a man who had watched her life as if it were a test case. He took one step back, needing distance from his own power, if nothing else. "Jabari's doctors are excellent," he said quietly. "Whatever he needs, he will get." Kadija's expression did not soften. "You think that sentence can save you?" "No." "Good, because it can't." He nodded once. "I know." Her eyes flashed. "Do you—" "Yes. You know because now you feel guilty." She shook her head. "That is not the same as understanding." Tendai accepted the blow without defense. In the silence that followed, his mind dragged him backward through every step that had led here, not just the lie with Kadija, but all the smaller rot that made the lie possible. Evelyn's betrayal, the rage afterward, the first test that felt justified, the second that felt strategic, the 10th that felt almost clinical. The way pain had slowly changed shape until he no longer wanted trust. He wanted proof that distrust was wisdom. He had called it discernment. He had called it caution. He had called it protecting himself. But beneath all those noble words, something uglier had been growing. Control. He had wanted women to reveal themselves under conditions. He designed pressure. He selected stakes. He manipulated. He had mistaken domination for truth because domination produced answers quickly, cleanly, conveniently. And because he was rich, the world kept giving him the tools to do it. Kadija watched his face reading some part of that inner collapse without knowing its exact contents. At the market, she said, "When you knelt in the dust, did you already know who I was?" "I knew your name," he said. "I knew you cared for your brother. I knew you worked harder than most people around you. I knew you were different. Different how?" He hesitated. That was enough to anger her again. "Say it." He forced himself to meet her eyes. "I thought you were the kind of woman who would not sell your character for comfort." Kadija stared at him in disbelief so complete it almost looked like pity. "You hear yourself, don't you?" He did. And once spoken aloud in that room, the sentence sounded exactly as monstrous as it was. "You thought I was the kind of woman worth testing," she said. "That is what you mean." His throat tightened. Yes. There it was. Plain. Ugly. Unhidden at last. Kadija laughed once under her breath, but there was no humor in it. "Men like you are dangerous because you think your disappointment makes you wise." She stepped closer, and Tendai could see how tired she was beneath the fury. "Do you know what poor women learn early? That rich men rarely ask questions for free. If they are kind, there is a reason. If they notice you, there is a reason. If they offer help, there is a reason. And if they fall in love too fast—" She stopped herself, jaw tightening. Tendai finished the sentence for her, though the words hurt to say. "There is a reason." "Yes." He looked down. In that moment he saw with brutal clarity that his lies had done more than hurt Kadija. They had confirmed the oldest, darkest lesson poverty teaches the vulnerable, that power never approaches empty-handed. It always comes carrying an appetite. He had become exactly that. The knowledge was unbearable. A soft knock interrupted them. Before either spoke, the door opened a fraction, and the pulmonologist stepped in holding a file. "Sorry," the doctor said carefully, sensing the atmosphere at once. "I have the preliminary results." Kadija turned toward him so quickly that for a second all her personal hurt vanished beneath something more urgent. "Tell me." The doctor glanced once at Tendai, then back to Kadija, choosing his words with professional caution. Your brother has severe chronic lung damage, likely from untreated infection over time. He also shows signs of recurrent bleeding and malnutrition. The good news is that we now know what we're dealing with. He needs aggressive treatment, close monitoring, and likely a longer recovery period than you expected. But this is treatable. Khadija's fingers flew to her mouth. Treatable. The word seemed to hit her harder than any insult could have, because hope when it comes after long helplessness is almost violent. Will he live? She asked. The doctor nodded. If treatment begins properly and continues, yes. We are very hopeful. Kadija closed her eyes. For 2 seconds, only 2, her whole body sagged under the weight of relief, too large to hold upright. Then she straightened again and asked the next practical question, because that was who she was. How much? The doctor hesitated. Tendai spoke before he could answer. That is not your concern. Kadija whirled toward him. It is exactly my concern. The doctor wisely stepped back. I'll give you both a moment. The nurse will bring the next paperwork. He left before either could stop him. The door closed again. Kadija faced Tendai with renewed clarity, now almost colder than before. This is where you think money redeems you, she said. Come, isn't it? He shook his head. No, it saves Jabari. It does not redeem me. The answer slowed her for half a heartbeat, but not much. I will not owe you, she said. You won't. You say that because you know debt can be emotional, not only financial. Yes. And you still think you can control what this means? No. He swallowed. I have lost that right. Kadija stared at him. Then hear me clearly. I'm listening. If Jabari gets treatment here, it is because he is sick and deserves care. Not because I forgive you. Not because you won something. Not because I am impressed by this building or your name or your wealth. I know. Do you? Her voice sharpened again. Because everything you did suggests you think human beings can be sorted by pressure. Tempted. Ranked. Proven. He had no defense left. So for the first time since she entered his life, Tendai did the one thing he had avoided with every other woman he tested. He told the full truth of the rot inside himself. When Evelyn betrayed me, he said, and Khadija's brow tightened slightly at the unfamiliar name I told myself I was learning. After that, every lie I caught in another woman felt like evidence that I had become smarter, stronger, harder to fool. I stopped looking for love and started building traps. I called them tests because that sounded cleaner than revenge. Kadija said nothing. He kept going because stopping now would be another act of cowardice. I thought if I could find one honest woman, then maybe I would know the world had not gone rotten. Maybe I would know I had not gone rotten. His voice dipped lower. But what I did instead was become the kind of man who could watch suffering and still ask what it revealed. That landed. Khadija's expression changed not into forgiveness, but into a harder, sadder recognition. This was no longer only about cruelty. It was about damage replicating itself through power. You let betrayal turn you into a judge, she said. Yes. And judges like you always choose poor people for the hardest exams because poor people cannot afford to fail. He closed his eyes briefly. Yes, the admission seemed to take something out of her. She sank into one of the leather chairs, not because she wanted comfort, but because exhaustion had finally claimed its due. Tendai remained standing. After a long silence, Kadija spoke again. In the market, she said, women laughed when you knelt. Some mocked you because they thought you were worthless. That was ugly. But do you know what is uglier? He waited. A man who thinks being mocked gives him permission to humiliate others more intelligently. The sentence struck with perfect force. Tendai sat down opposite her, as if his body had stopped asking his permission. Outside the glass wall, executives and nurses moved through the corridor with lowered voices, sensing disturbance without knowing its depth. Inside, two people sat facing the wreckage of a lie, and the richer one understood at last that money did not merely magnify what a man possessed, it magnified what he refused to heal. Kadija leaned back and looked at the ceiling for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice had gone quieter. "I am leaving after Jabari is admitted." Tendai's body went still. "I thought so," he said. "I am not asking your permission. You don't need it." She lowered her eyes to him again. "I will not stay in your guest house. I will not move into some apartment you assign me. I will not let you relocate me like a case file. I won't ask you to. I don't trust what you won't ask." That too was fair. He nodded. "Then I will do only what Jabari needs medically. Nothing more unless you request it." Kadija considered that. "You will probably still do more." "Probably." A bitter half-smile touched his mouth and vanished. "But I will try." Her own expression did not change. Then came the final blow, the one Tendai would remember longer than the shouting, the exposure, the shame. Kadija stood. "I used to think poverty was the cruelest thing in my life," she said. "But poverty only stripped things away. What you did was worse. You took truth and dressed it as kindness until I opened my door to it." Tendai rose too, though he felt older suddenly. She continued calm now, in the way people become calm when a decision is complete. "You asked whether a woman could love a man with nothing. That was never the real question. The real question is whether a man with everything can be trusted not to use it like a weapon." He looked at her and knew in a way he had never known anything that he had failed the only test that mattered. Not Kadija, himself. And no amount of money in that gleaming hospital, no treatment plan, no discreet generosity, no confession delivered too late could alter that verdict. A nurse knocked gently and entered with admission papers for Jabari. Kadija took them. She signed where needed. Then she walked past Tendai toward the door. At the threshold, she stopped without turning around. "When Jabari is stronger," she said, "I will take him somewhere your shadow cannot follow." And then she left him standing alone in the executive lounge he once believed gave him power. Now it felt like a beautifully furnished witness box. For the first time in his adult life, Tendai Adebayo discovered that money could obey him and still fail him completely. Jabari was admitted that same afternoon. The best pulmonologist in the hospital reviewed his scans twice. A nutrition specialist was added. A private room was prepared. Medication that had been impossible in Kadija's world appeared within an hour in neat labeled trays beside the bed. Nurses came quickly when the boy coughed. Machines monitored what poverty had long forced the family to guess at in fear and darkness. Everything worked. Everything moved. Everything efficient, polished, expensive, exact. And none of it changed the fact that Kadija would not look at him. She remained at Jabari's bedside through the first night, sleeping only in brief, upright bursts in the chair beside him. When nurses offered the adjoining family suite, she refused. When administrators suggested easier accommodations, she refused. When Tendai sent a tray of proper food, she let Jabari eat from it and returned the untouched plate meant for her. No note, no thank you, no scene. Just refusal. That hurt him more than shouting had. Because anger still acknowledged relationship. Silence did not. By the third day, Jabari's fever had dropped enough for him to sit up without gasping. The coughing remained brutal, but the blood lessened. His eyes looked clearer. For the first time since Tendai met him, the boy asked for extra tea and complained about hospital porridge. The complaint sounded almost miraculous. Tendai visited only when Kadija was absent from the room. That was deliberate. She had made no formal demand, but the message was unmistakable. Do not turn care into presence. Do not use Jabari's treatment as a bridge back into our trust. So Tendai kept distance and gave instructions only through the medical team. No special flowers, no branded gifts, No security surrounding Kadija. No relocation offers. No press mentions. Nothing that would make charity feel like ownership. Still, his shadow remained everywhere. That was the problem with power. Even when he tried to make it invisible, it altered the temperature of every room before he entered. On the 5th day, he found a folded envelope waiting on his office desk. Not in the hospital. At headquarters. The handwriting on the front was unsteady, but careful. For Jabari's medicine. Inside were 8 notes of small cash flattened and aligned as if dignity could be preserved through order. There was no letter, only the money. Tendai stared at it for a long time. He knew exactly what it meant. Kadija was already trying to repay what could not realistically be repaid, not because she believed the sum mattered, but because the act mattered. Because naming debt was one way to resist being swallowed by it. He called no one. He sent the envelope back to the hospital room with a single line written on a plain card. For Jabari, not for me. Keep your strength. The envelope came back unopened. That night, Tendai drove alone through the district where Kadija lived, not to see her, not to be seen. He kept the windows up and the lights dim as he passed the old market road, the water tap, the rows of patched rooms where survival pressed close to the skin. He stopped once near the junction where he had seen her selling blood, and sat with both hands on the wheel while traffic hissed past in the dark. It was there that he finally understood the shape of his punishment. He could save Jabari. He could not undo what Kadija had learned from him. She would always know now that a man could kneel in dust and still be dangerous. That a poor face could hide a powerful appetite. That even tenderness could be staged. He had not merely hurt her feelings. He had corrupted a fragile possibility inside her that honesty might come unarmed. He went home after midnight and dismissed 3 calls from board members without listening to the messages. The next morning he made a different kind of decision. He began dismantling the machinery that had made his cruelty easy. Sefu was first. They met in Tendai's office with the blinds open and the city harshly visible beyond the glass. It ends now, Tendai said. Sefu, who had expected this since the hospital, only nodded once. All of it, every file, every alias, every rented room, every report. Sefu studied him quietly. You are sure, no? I am ashamed. That is more useful. They sat in silence a moment. Then Tendai added, I used you badly. Sefu accepted the sentence without dramatics. You paid me to do difficult things. I agreed. That doesn't make it clean. No. Sefu rose. But ending it matters. After Sefu left, Tendai called Kwame in. His assistant entered with the brittle composure of a man who had been carrying his own guilt in silence. You should fire me, Kwame said before sitting. Tendai almost laughed, though there was no humor in it. For obeying me, for helping you become someone smaller than your title. The truth of that tightened the air between them. Instead of answering immediately, Tendai slid a document across the desk. Kwame looked down. It was a proposal to restructure the company's charitable foundation into an independent medical trust for low-income chronic care patients. No branding on the aid, no publicity hooks, no selection based on sentiment. Only referrals needs and audited care access. Quiet work, unmarketable work, real work. Kwame looked up. You already signed it at dawn? Kwame read further, then stopped at the budget line and exhaled. This is not symbolic. No. Does she know? Tendai's expression hardened slightly. It is not for her approval. That mattered. Because he understood now how easily repentance could become another performance if staged for the injured person's eyes. He was not trying to impress Kadija back into faith. He was trying very late to stop being the kind of man who needed to test goodness because he feared he no longer possessed any. 10 days after admission, Jabari was strong enough to laugh at a television program in the ward. That sound reached Kadija before it reached Tendai, but it changed both of them differently. For Kadija, it softened the permanent brace inside her chest, just enough to allow sleep deeper than exhaustion. She still spoke little, still moved through the hospital with guarded precision, still refused almost every comfort touched by Tendai's name. But now, when Jabari teased the nurses or complained dramatically about tablets, she sometimes smiled before remembering herself. For Tendai, Jabari's laughter was both relief and indictment. A boy should not need access to a billionaire's guilt to sound like a child again. One afternoon, as he stepped out of the stairwell to avoid the elevators, Tendai nearly collided with Kadija outside the pediatric recovery unit. They both stopped. For a second, instinct dragged him backward into the old version of himself, the man who would manage, persuade appeal. But that man had done enough damage, so he only stepped aside. Kadija held a paper pharmacy list in one hand. Her face looked less hollow than before, but the caution in her eyes remained absolute. "I was going to settle those," he said, glancing at the list. She folded it once. "I know." He nodded. "I won't." That seemed to surprise her slightly. The silence stretched. At last, Kadija spoke. "Jabari wants to thank you." Tendai looked up. "I told him gratitude and forgiveness are not the same thing," she said. "He said he knows." A painful half-smile touched Tendai's mouth. "He's smarter than most adults I know." "Yes?" Again silence. This time Kadija broke it with a sentence so simple it took him a moment to understand its weight. "You stopped sending things." "Yes." "Why? Because you were clear." She watched him carefully, as if testing whether humility in a rich man might also be a tactic. And because he added care that keeps forcing itself to be seen is only another form of control. Something shifted in her expression then. Not trust, nothing so generous, but perhaps the smallest recognition that he had finally heard at least one lesson without trying to rewrite it in his own language. Jabari was discharged 12 days later with a long recovery plan, follow-up appointments, and instructions strict enough to frighten any caregiver. Kadija listened to every detail twice and made the nurse repeat the dosage schedule a third time. She asked sharp questions about side effects, nutrition, transport, relapse signs, and emergency contacts. Her seriousness impressed the consultant enough that he later told Tendai privately, "That boy survives because his sister does not miss what matters." Tendai only answered, "I know." When discharge was complete, Kadija refused the chauffeured vehicle waiting downstairs. She also refused the furnished apartment the hospital social worker, without Tendai's permission this time, had tried to arrange through a donor network. She accepted only what Jabari medically required transport vouchers for scheduled review visits, medication, and one portable air purifier after the doctor insisted. Nothing else? In the parking area, Jabari hugged Tendai awkwardly, with the sudden wholeheartedness only children can manage. "Thank you," the boy said. Tendai bent slightly, careful not to hold him too tightly. "Get stronger. Then argue with your sister less." Jabari grinned. "That part may be impossible." Kadija stood beside them, one hand on the small bag of medicine, the other resting lightly at Jabari's shoulder. When the boy moved toward the taxi, she finally looked at Tendai fully. There were no tears in her face now, no rage either, only a grave, hard-won steadiness. "What happens next," she said, "is not yours to script." The sentence carried no heat. That made it more powerful than anger. Tendai inclined his head. "I know." "If you truly know," she said, "then let change be quiet." He nodded once. She turned to go, then stopped. There, in the pale afternoon light, beside a hospital that knew his name better than hers, Kadija gave him the only mercy he had any right to receive. Not love, not reconciliation, a chance to become different without being watched. Jabari should not grow up learning that men apologize with money, she said. So if you mean to be sorry, be different somewhere that does not benefit you. Then she walked away with her brother. Weeks passed. No dramatic reunion came. No soft music of destiny pulled them back together too quickly. Kadija returned to the market part-time, while Jabari continued treatment and slowly regained weight. Tendai kept his distance. The trust was launched quietly. The Foundation stopped using wounded faces in glossy reports. A predatory regional manager, long protected because he increased profits, was dismissed after Tendai personally reopened complaints the company had buried. Labor housing conditions at 2 subsidiary sites were upgraded without media coverage. It was not sainthood. It was responsibility. And one late afternoon, nearly 3 months after the hospital confrontation, Tendai went back to the market, not disguised, not surrounded, not announced, just himself. The dust still rose red in the evening light. The same women sold fish peppers, fabric oranges. The same children darted through moving bodies. The same world carried on with indifference to private redemption. Kadija looked up from her stall and saw him at once. She did not smile, but she did not turn away. Jabari, thinner still but standing stronger, sat on a crate beside her, sorting limes by size. When he noticed Tendai, his face lit up openly before he remembered the dignity of adults and tried to calm it down. Tendai stopped a respectful distance away. No ring in hand, no crowd performance, no borrowed poverty, only truth. "I came with my name," he said. Kadija held his gaze. "And nothing hidden," he added. The market noise moved around them. For a moment the past stood between them, in full, unsoftened shape. Then Kadija glanced at Jabari, at the stall, at the man before her, who now looked more tired and more honest than the polished CEO newspapers admired. When she spoke, her voice was quiet. "That is a better place to begin. Not forgiveness. Not yet. But not refusal either. And because Tendai had finally learned the difference between winning a woman and honoring one, he did not rush the silence that followed. This time, when hope entered the space between them, it did not come dressed as a test. It came as truth. Sometimes life does not reveal people when they are powerful. It reveals them when they are wounded. Tendai believed betrayal had taught him wisdom, but in truth, it had only taught him fear. And fear, when left unhealed, can turn a human heart into a courtroom where everyone must prove they are innocent before they are allowed to be loved. Kadija, on the other hand, had every reason to become bitter. She had known poverty, humiliation, exhaustion, and loss. Yet she still protected her dignity, her responsibility, and her honesty, even when life gave her almost nothing in return. That is what makes her strength so powerful. Real character is not loud. It is the quiet decision to remain true when lying would be easier, when betrayal would be more profitable, and when giving up would feel justified. This story reminds us that love cannot grow where control lives, and trust cannot survive where truth is used like a weapon. But it also reminds us of something beautiful. People can change when they finally face the harm they have caused and choose responsibility over pride. Healing begins when excuses end. And sometimes the greatest proof of love is not being chosen at first sight, but becoming someone worthy of being trusted at last. If this story touched your heart, tell me in the comments which moment hit you the hardest and what would you have done if you were Kadija. And if you enjoy emotional, powerful stories about justice, healing, and real human change, subscribe to the channel and stay with me for the next journey.